Fear memories, in fact, cannot be forgotten. Let me repeat this again. It's completely impossible to forget fear memories. If you get a fear memory, it will be permanently stored in the amygdala in your brain for the rest of your life. Fear is just a feeling. More precisely, fear is just a biological stress response that is marked by the release of stress hormones, which are called adrenaline and cortisol. And interestingly enough, the only difference between fear and enjoyment is A, the context, or B, whether you have formed a fear memory in the past. Now, what do I mean by context? For example, if you love horror movies, then a scary movie might actually be enjoyable for you. Perhaps you love the tension and the increase in heartbeat, the sweatiness, etc., that is caused by the release of stress hormones. And indeed, your mindset affects the threat detection center in your brain, the amygdala. And that's why some scary things cause massive fear, while other scary things actually don't. Now, besides context, there are fear memories, of course. And if you were cycling on the street and hit by a car, then it could possibly result in a permanent fear memory. So just seeing a bicycle might cause excessive fear in that case. And therefore, a fear memory can be permanently debilitating for you in the future. And this is when we call it trauma. Now, that said, in today's video, you will learn how to master your fear, which is actually simply stress, in fact, with the power of neuroscience. First, I will explain the biology behind what causes the feeling of fear. And this is important to know because knowledge is power in this case. Second, I will talk about how fear memories are formed and how to erase them with a process called fear extinction. And yes, you cannot forget a fear memory. You cannot, because there's evidence that fear memories are stored in the amygdala for the rest of your life. You need to do something else, so make sure to watch this part. And finally, third, given that this is a YouTube channel for high performers, I will give you tools. I will tell you what you need to do to master fear, but also stress with excellence. And this, of course, includes adjusting your mindset as well. Now, before we get started, please take a moment to smash those like and subscribe buttons so that we can build an army of high performers and neuroscience enthusiasts together. I would highly appreciate it. That said, my name is Nicholas. I'm a neuroscientist, dementia researcher, as well as a high performance and flow coach. And this is how to crush your fear and extinguish fear memories with the power of neuroscience. To begin with, let's talk about grid, because as I mentioned in one of my earlier videos, which I will link you guys in the comments, there's a form of grid that is called fear grid. Now, fear grid means that you can rely on fearlessness, because fearlessness or fear in itself is actually a stress response. And obviously, we cannot simply switch via our biology. So it's not about being fearless. However, it is about being courageous. So you need to be able to take action despite the feeling of fear. And how you can do that, that will also be part of this video. Now, as I mentioned just now, fear is in fact, simply put, a stress response, an automatic stress response more precisely. And before we get into that, I want to distinguish between two terms, which are fear and anxiety. What is the difference? Now, fear is typically short-lasting. So simply an event happens, you become fearful. So it's basically an immediate response. And fear also usually involves anxiety. Now, anxiety, on the other hand, it's more of a long-lasting, unspecific, and diffuse feeling. So meaning that you can actually feel anxiety without any danger present. And anxiety is actually also influenced by different hormones in your body. One of these hormones could, for example, be the hunger hormone, ghrelin. Why do I mention ghrelin? Simply because I've just written a publication about it, in fact, that is about how ghrelin influences memory formation. There's actually also a strong link between ghrelin, the hunger hormone, and PTSD, believe it or not. However, point being is that if your ghrelin levels are high, in other words, if you're hungry, then you are more anxious. And the reason why is because of ghrelin. Other than that, you have, of course, also hormones such as adrenaline itself, the stress hormone, which can also cause anxiety. So more about it in a moment. What we want to talk about now is called the HPA axis. by HPA, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis in long, simply because it involves these three things. It involves the hypothalamus, it involves the pituitary gland, and the adrenal gland in sequence. And what happens here in particular is that either A, you recall something fearful, so you recall a fear memory, maybe they were almost hit by a car on the bicycle, for example, or B, you get into a scary situation. Obviously, maybe someone fires a gun, and of course, that shocks you, that's stressful. And what happens in this case is that a area in your brain called the amygdala, also known as the threat detection center, so detects whether something is threatful, whether something is actually dangerous for you. So the amygdala then kicks off or instructs your hypothalamus to release a hormone called CRH, cortical trophin releasing hormone. This hormone then activates the pituitary gland to release another hormone called ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, and that ultimately leads to the release of cortisol and other stress hormones, in particular adrenaline, by your adrenal gland. So as you can see, it's pretty much a series of hormonal release stations from your brain down to your adrenal glands, and these hormones that are released from your adrenal glands, cortisol over the long term, adrenaline, which acts very fast, those then create the fight and flight response, the stress response as we know it. So that might be the fact that your heart rate goes up, you start sweating, maybe you start shivering, you become uneasy, such things. And the fight or flight response also involves one of three actions. My apologies. That means that you either fight, flight, or you simply freeze. In a more appropriate context, it would mean fight. For example, someone scares you, someone pulls a knife, and of course, stress hormones are released. You get this fear reaction, and you start to fight this guy. You pretty much approach him, you beat him up, you try to pull the knife out of his hands. So that would be the fight response. Then you could do the flight response, meaning that if you get into this fearful situation, all of these hormones is released, maybe you run away. And it doesn't have to be physically running away. It could also simply be that you feel like getting away from it. For example, if you do a public speaking engagement and you feel like running away, you don't want to give it, that will be the flight response. And we have freezing. So as the name says, you just freeze. Maybe you're about to be hit by a car, but you're so shocked, you're so in fear, all of the stress hormones are so tight in your body, you simply cannot move a single finger. Now, importantly is that your mindset affects this cascade. So your mindset affects if the amygdala is activated, the threat detection center in your brain. And in fact, whether the amygdala is active or not decides whether you see the stress as good or bad. So if the amygdala is involved, it's a pretty bad thing for you. However, if the amygdala is not involved, then it's just stress. And this could actually even be positive for you, eustress. I will talk about how stress can be beneficial for you in a moment. However, just keep in mind that your mindset affects everything. Your mindset affects whether a situation is actually stressful for you, or whether you think this situation is actually energizing for you even, or whether you even can use it to your advantage. Now, let's talk about fear memories next, because that is also what this video is about, of course. And I made a little joke there on the left-hand side with the mice and the student. And these are actually experiments that we do in the lab. So you put basically mice in there. The experiments where you hope that the mice press a lever so that you give them dopamine, food as a reward. Also to measure the dopamine reward system in the brain, etc. So in those cases, you of course hope that the mice do something and don't just sit there in the corner. So it's actually a very real joke. So I've done stuff like that myself. Other than that, the point here is association memories. So in this case, the mouse would learn if it presses a lever, it gets food, for example. Or it presses a lever and the student, the postgraduate student, makes a sigh of relief. Whatever it is, if this happens over and over again, then at some point association memory is formed. Event A leads to event B. Pressing the lever gives me food, for example. And this is also exactly how fear memories are created. And you can do this in the lab. We call this Pavlovian or classical conditioning. So in this case, for example, you would play a tone. We call this conditioned stimulus, so just a beep sound. And while you give this beep sound, you give a foot shock. Don't worry, it's just a mild foot shock, so it's just a little zing. However, what happens is that this association is formed, that whenever the tone is played, you get a foot shock. And it usually doesn't take much to learn this association, to learn a fear memory like that. A single event is often actually enough to create such a fear memory. And what happens then is that this association memory sticks in your brain. And in the future, when the mice, whenever they hear a sound, whenever they hear this specific beep sound, they freeze in fear because they know what's coming, because they believe again they get another foot shock. So there could of course be many examples. I had one last week, in fact. I was just sitting there doing my normal work. All of a sudden, I got really sweaty. I got heartbeat. I got really anxious all of a sudden. I was like, what the hell is going on? And then I realized that I was just hypoglycemic. So for your information, I have low blood pressure, and I sometimes get into these states, especially in the afternoon when I feel a bit dizzy. And I realized that I associate this state of being dizzy with migraine, because as a child I had migraines all the time. It was probably because I wore braces back then, and I somehow learned this fear memory, this association between being dizzy and again getting a migraine. So I had this, I was just sitting there and I was like, ooh, no problem, I know what's up, but now I won't get migraines anymore because I don't wear braces anymore. So I just relaxed, I calmed down, and just let it happen, and the fear response, the stress response, in fact, just disappears. So this is one of the reasons why I told you in the beginning that knowledge is power, because if you know what causes this fear response, what causes the stress response, you can relax. More about how to handle fear in a moment or later also. But one thing I want to point out is that if this fear memory is very strong and if it impairs your normal life significantly, then we call it trauma. And when you seriously have a trauma, then I highly encourage you to consult an expert, a therapist. One of the reasons why is because exposing yourself to your fear, talking about it all over again, is one of the ways with which you can actually desensitize to this fear reaction. So this fear reaction, the more often you expose yourself to your fear, goes down over time. That's why talking about your fears, that's why talking to a therapist is actually so beneficial. And that brings us to the next point, and that's the fact that fear memories, in fact, cannot be forgotten. Let me repeat this again. It's completely impossible to forget fear memories. If you get a fear memory, it will be permanently stored in the amygdala in your brain for the rest of your life. Knowing that, however, there are two steps with which you can remove these fears, and we call these steps fear extinction. And the first step in this process is that you, as I just mentioned, you need to desensitize to this threat reflex. You have to desensitize to this automatic stress response in response to remembering something fearful or in response to a fearful event. Simply put, you have to do it all over again until it just feels boring to you. In the case of traumas, you just tell yourself the same story all over again. So how you were abused as a child, whatever it is, all over and over again until it just becomes a bad story, basically, until it doesn't engage you anymore, until this story loses its grasp on you. If you're hit by a car while you were on your bicycle, what you have to do is just ride your bicycle all over again, over and over and over again, until you don't get the fear response from cycling anymore. So it is simple as that. Do it all over again. And I picked out a nice study for you. That's one of many, in fact, in 2002, but I like it for pretty much the experiments it did and the conclusions it made back then. But this is going back to the mice. So if you remember that, you can condition a mouse to give it a foot shock, give it a beep sound at the same time to create this fear memory. And what was shown here is that, again, if you give this beep sound all over again, beep, 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 all over again, day after day after day, At some point, the mouse learns that, hey, there's this beep sound, but there's no foot track anymore. I think I'm good. So over time, the mouse pretty much learns this association. Now, that aside, it is important to know that this is not enough, because you also see it on the right-hand side of this diagram here, that the fear can actually return. By the way, in this diagram shown is freezing, so that is how you measure fear in animal studies. So the amount to give the beep sound, and the longer the mouse freezes, the stronger the fear memory is. The more the mouse remembers that it gets a foot shock after the beep sound, basically. But the point in the study also is that fear can reappear. And that is because, again, fear memories are not forgotten. They are permanently stored in your brain. And that is why something else needs to happen. And that was also shown in this study. So what they particularly pointed out, that a new memory is formed. And this new memory is called extinction memory. And this extinction memory is recalled instead of your old fear memory. For example, let's say you are hit by a car. You're cycling along the street and you're hit by a car. That, of course, leads to the fear memory, to this association between cycling and being hit by a car. So every time you step on a bicycle, you get this massive fear response. Your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate goes up, and you don't want to cycle. Then, of course, you'd still do it, because you know now that you need to expose yourself to your fear. And as you do it, as you cycle over and over again, it will become less fearful for you. The stress response will go away. And then you have to learn a new memory, which we call extinction memory. And this extinction memory is ideally positive. In this case, this would mean that, for example, maybe you go cycling with your best friend. So you learn a new association between cycling and being together with your best friends. And this fear memory is then recalled instead of your old fear memory. And that is also what was actually shown in this study in particular. Now, once again, to go over this, what you have to do is first desensitize, and second, and of course, create this new and positive extinction memory that you recall instead of the actual fear memory. So to give you another example to make this very clear for you, and that you hopefully hang on with me here, it could be that your previous fear memory is that you spoke in public and you horribly embarrassed yourself. And every time you step on a stage, you feel like quitting, you feel like running away. Just the stress is too much for you, the fear is too much for you. So what you would have to do is desensitize. So again, speak. Force yourself to speak as often as humanly possible. Use every single opportunity to speak in public, because you will desensitize over time. So the stress response, release of adrenaline and cortisol whenever you step on the stage, it will go away the more often you do it. Then ultimately you have to form a new extinction memory that replaces the old fear memory. So in this case, it could be that you might speak in public and that you all of a sudden have an amazing speech. So you praise, you get cheers from everyone. Everyone acknowledges you for your incredible eloquence while you spoke, and maybe even receive a reward. So then you form this new positive memory. Again, you speak in public, you're rewarded, it feels incredible. And when you get an event such as this, then of course it replaces the old bad memory, and public speaking can become something amazing. By the way, as a side note, public speaking is the #1 fear in the world, so I'm not just making this up. And one of the reasons why is because being lonely, being alone is actually assessed as a mortal risk by our brain, by the threat detection center in our brain, the amygdala more precisely. So there's one of the reasons why anything that is going against our social status, that reduces our social status, or why disappointing someone else is such a problem for us, because it activates this ancient part of our brain, the amygdala, the threat detection center. And once again, this is because being alone in the past meant that you were probably about to die, because being left alone in an ice storm, without food, without any help by other people, obviously not a way to survive, especially not in the Stone Age. Now that said, as I pointed out, you have to expose yourself to your fears if you want to get rid of them. You have to desensitize. And the question now becomes, how do you do that? And the mechanism of which you do that, I point out here, because you have two forces in your brain. You need to know this. You have your emotional force and you have your logical brain, your logical force. On the one hand, the limbic system. The limbic system is the amygdala, so the threat detection center, but also other parts of your brain like the hippocampus, which is responsible for long-term memory. And this is basically, again, the emotional part of your brain. So we call this limbic friction also. So this part of your brain, that is the emotional part that is related to fast heartbeat. Maybe you shiver, maybe you feel like running away, you feel very uncomfortable. So you have all of this emotional force that is coming from the stress response, is coming from the fear response. And on the other side of your brain, literally is in front of your brain, is the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for logic reasoning. So that's where we make logic decisions. That's where we do long-term planning. That's where we assign context to situations. And in this case, this prefrontal cortex, the logic part of your brain, has to go against your emotions. Obviously, if you want to beat your fears, you have to realize that the emotions, the feelings are there, but you have to convince yourself of doing it regardless. And that's what this prefrontal cortex does. So you might tell yourself, you might step on the stage, you feel incredibly fearful, you feel like running away, you don't want to do it, you don't want to be here. Then your logic part of your brain could be, or exert what we call top-down control. So it could basically control the emotional part of your brain and say, calm down, I've done this before, I held a few speeches in the past, it was all fine, I can do it again. And also maybe you can change your mindset and say, hey, why not using this as an opportunity to train my fear grid up, to train my ability to take action despite fear. So that's again why mindset is so important, because your mindset influences all of this. And ultimately, as I mentioned in the beginning, what you have to learn is to take action despite the sensation of fear. You have to learn to approach, to take action, to do what you want to do, despite feeling this rush of stress hormones in your body. Now, the question, of course, is how do you overcome your emotions? How do you overcome your fear? I lined up the 3 steps for you once again. So you have to face your fear. You have to do it all over again so that it desensitizes over time, so that the stress response, heartbeat, etc. goes away, and that you get used to it, basically. But that's not enough because, again, fear and fear memory stay in your brain forever. However, what you can do is learn a new memory, a new positive extinction memory that pretty much is recall instead of your old fear memory. In other words, in order to overcome your fear, first and foremost, understand that fear is just a feeling. As you hopefully know by now, it's just a release of a few stress hormones in your body. That's it. And you also need to understand that these stress hormones are actually not bad. They're actually beneficial for you in many cases, because the purpose of these stress hormones is to mobilize your brain and muscles for action. If you're about to be hit by a car, then all of these stress hormones in your body, again, they pump blood into your muscles, and that allows you to jump out of the way. That way you survive. Literally. Also, stress hormones can enhance the speed of your brain, so you think faster, you pay more attention, and that can actually be really useful in a work context. Also understand that fear and excitement are actually interchangeable. So what this means is that the release of a stress hormone, adrenaline, it causes anxiety. However, a little bit less adrenaline causes excitement. So that's actually one of the reasons why a scary movie can actually be exciting for you, because you get this release of the stress hormone adrenaline, and this makes you feel this rush, this excitement. There's in fact also a link of the amygdala of the threat detection center to the dopamine system. So you literally can even get the reward chemical dopamine and feel good after overcoming your fears. So just for you to know, this is just a neutral response in your body, and you can even use this to your advantage. And also your mindset matters. I pointed out a specific study for you here that was in 174 Navy SEALs candidates. And in this study in particular, it was actually found that the stress is enhancing mindset. So if the Navy SEALs candidates thought that being stressed is actually good for them, makes them better, makes them perform better, it did so in fact. So these Navy SEAL candidates, they were more persistent, they pushed through their training more, they actually completed obstacles faster, and they even had better evaluations from their peers and instructors. So yeah, simply believing that stress is good for you in itself helps. It's also when you overcome your fear. If you believe that you want to do this for a purpose, if you think that overcoming your fears helps you to train your grit, for example, that you want to use advantage of the energy that you get from this, from the stress response, it's probably good for you. It can energize you. Then another thing, very importantly, now we get into tools in particular, what you can do is to raise your stress tolerance. You can raise the ceiling of your stress tolerance, because the more stress you can tolerate, the easier it will be for you to overcome your fears, obviously, because fears are, as you know, just stress responses. And ways in which you can train your stress tolerance would be Wim Hof breathing, or cyclic hyperventilation as it's also called. So in this case, you would just breathe in aggressively through your nose and exhale through your mouth 25 to 30 times. So it will look like this. So we basically do that, aggressively exhale through your mouth especially. Do that 25 to 30 times and then have a long exhale. What you will notice is that because of the release of adrenaline, you will actually heat up, your heart rate will go up, you might even get a little bit dizzy, you might even get a slight feeling of panic. But this trains you to pretty much adapt to this feeling. And the more adapted you are to the stress feeling, the easier it will be for you to overcome fear and of course to tolerate higher levels of stress. You will perform better, simply put. Otherwise, with which you can do that is box breathing. So box breathing would mean to inhale 7 seconds, hold 7 seconds, exhale 7 seconds, hold 7 seconds, and repeat the entire thing 7 times. That can also cause a feeling of panic from the buildup of carbon dioxide in your body. But then again, then you learn to actually tolerate these feelings. It becomes easier for you. And you can do cold showers. In fact, I made a previous video about cold showers, about the science of it and how you can use it to train your grit. So I will link it for you guys in the comments, so check that out. I love cold showers myself personally, and I use it to do what I will tell you now. And that is that the key to master your emotions, whatever it is, whether it's stress, whether it's fear, whatever, is to keep your mind relaxed. Let me repeat that. It might be counterintuitive, but you must learn to keep your mind relaxed, if not mellow. That is the key. That is the secret, you could say. And cold showers are a fantastic way to do that. So you get under the cold water, you feel the cold water shock, you feel like getting out. Your mind goes haywire, but you force yourself, you train yourself to stay mentally relaxed and calm. And if you learn to do this in a stressful situation, if you learn to do this in a fearful situation, to just accept the feeling, just accept the rush of adrenaline, accept the uncomfortable feeling of fear and relax, just relax your mind, then it's so much easier to tolerate it and you will perform better. I even do this in the gym. Sometimes I don't feel like training. I feel absolutely horrible, mentally fractured. I get on the bar, I squat a heavy set, and I feel like quitting, just a single set, and don't want to do it. And the way with which I deal with that is, again, to keep my mind relaxed. I just, once again, leave it. I just do it, don't think about it, and that actually helps me to perform better, as counterintuitive as it is. So you should not hype yourself. Instead, what is useful for you is to just do the opposite and relax, and then take action. In addition to that, optimizing your recovery in general is useful. Of course, make sure you have your sleep down, sleep 7 to 8 hours. And of course, you can use active recovery protocols that reduce stress levels throughout your day in general. So 12 to 20 minutes of meditation would be fantastic. I made a separate video about the neuroscience of meditation, so we'll link you that in the comments as well. The many benefits such as increased intelligence are worthwhile. Then we have yoga nidra, which is comparable to sensory meditation, exercise yoga, etc. You name it. And yeah, finally, to summarize it all, the steps for fear and stress mastery are simply put that you need to change your mindset first and foremost, because as you know now, there are studies that even prove that stress can actually be beneficial for you if you believe that it's beneficial for you. So simply see stressful and fearful situations as opportunities to train your grit and see them as energizing, because the opposite, being sluggish, sucks even more, trust me. Then what you also need to learn, as I just mentioned, is to stay mentally clear and relaxed in the high stress levels. I train myself with cold showers doing so. That allows me also to tackle other stressful and even fearful situations more easily. So again, relax. Learn to relax your mind. And finally, of course, with this relaxed mind, take action. Because by taking action, you desensitize the fear. It could be an event, it could be a fear memory that you have. You just have to expose yourself to it over and over again until, again, this automatic stress response disappears. And finally, of course, you need to form a new positive association. And that concludes the video. So thank you for your time and attention. Now, fear is just a feeling, or more precisely, a biological stress response. And by getting adjusted and comfortable with how fear feels, you will learn to take action despite the feeling of fear. And once you take action, you will desensitize to those fear memories that hold you back. You will accomplish more, and a whole new world will open up for you. So I encourage you to train up your fear grid and to crush it. Now, of course, if you're very ambitious and if you want to reach the next level of physical and mental performance to accomplish all of your goals and even go beyond what you thought is possible, just shoot me an email at niklas.reich@gmail.com for neuroscience-backed high performance and flow coaching. More information in the video description. That said, have a courageous week, high performers, and I will see you in the next video.